Hello everyone. I want to welcome you to a flipped classroom on section 1 of chapter 1, the Renaissance in Italy. You can find information about what I'm going to go over starting on page 34 and going to page 39. The reason why I'm saying that is because in a couple of days you're going to have an assessment on this information. So what I like to start off with, and which I'll do with all our major units of study, is essential questions. And you could see here the first essential question is, how can trade lead to economic prosperity and political power, which we'll be going through as we look at this information. Second one is, how can ideas be reflected in art, sculpture, architecture, and literature? And again, I'll be talking about that as I go through this information with you. Now, the Renaissance in Italy is very fascinating to look at, but the word itself, it's French for rebirth, and the Renaissance in Italy started in the 1300s and it reached its peak around 1500. However, there is some evidence to say that it even continued for another 100 years. Why Italy? Why was Italy the birthplace of the Renaissance? And the first thing is that Italy was the center and is still today the remains from the Roman Empire. Architectural ruins such as the Colosseum in Rome, statues, and even coins that they're still finding today in certain projects in Rome. Second thing is that Italy had certain city-states such as Florence, Milan, and Venice. And in fact, if you look on page 35 of your textbook, you could see where they were located on the Italian peninsula that survived the Middle Ages and that grew into prosperous centers of trade and manufacturing. And the third thing that we were looking at here is that Italy had a wealthy merchant class that had political and economic power. They also stressed education, but most importantly here is the idea of individual achievement. And they were definitely supporters of the arts financially. Now, a very famous family from the Renaissance was the Medici family, and they were from Florence. They were into banking and other businesses such as mining and textiles. The most famous out of this family was Lorenzo. He was known as Lorenzo the Magnificent in the 1400s. And what Lorenzo was, along with other members of the Medici family, he was a patron, a financial supporter of the arts. Okay, what was the Renaissance? The Renaissance was a new worldview. Unlike the Middle Ages or medieval scholars who tended to focus on life after death, thinkers of the Renaissance focused on the here and now or the present day. They were more concerned with what was going on in their lives in the immediate. They also put an emphasis on, again, individual achievement, the achievement of the individual. And the Renaissance ideal, a person with many talents, a person who could write, who could speak well, who could play sports, and who can even sing or play different instruments. And the last thing, what the Renaissance was, it was a spirit of adventure where you had explorers, writers, artists, and science. Again, it was a spirit of adventure with explorers such as Christopher Columbus, writers such as Machiavelli, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, artists such as Da Vinci, and scientists such as Galileo. I also want to go over two terms here at the top with you, the word humanism, and notice what's in the root of the word human, which focused on worldly subjects rather than religious issues. You also have this other term known as the humanities, that were subjects taught in ancient Greek and Roman schools, such as grammar, rhetoric, which is the art, again, of persuasion, poetry, and history. And one early humanist that we have here is a man named Francesco Petrarch, who located and assembled a library of Greek and Roman manuscripts. And at the bottom here is a picture of Petrarch, and you can notice the laurel wreath around his head. What we also had with the Renaissance in Italy was a golden age in the arts. You had humanist concerns, such as with the sculptor Donatello. You had new techniques, such as perspective, which I'll talk to you about in a moment. And you had women artists, such as Sofonisba Anguissola, who was an Italian noblewoman, court painter to Philip II of Spain. You had architecture, such as Filippo Brunelleschi, who won a contest in designing the dome for Florence or the Duomo. I will send you in a couple of minutes also, or maybe in a couple of days, a link to Rick Stevens, who went to Florence and went to the dome and went to the top of it. Absolutely fascinating. And of course, what we have down here is we have three geniuses of Renaissance art: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, who is the painter of the ceiling for the Sistine Chapel in the Vatican, and Raphael, who painted the School of Athens. If you notice in the Google Classroom, the School of Athens is shown there. And there at the top here is a picture of Sofonisba Anguissola. Now, what you'll notice here again is an image of the School of Athens. It was painted by Raphael, and what he utilized here is the idea of perspective. Maybe you're taking art classes right now, or have taken art classes where they've talked about perspective, the vanishing point, about images being farther away, being small, but as you come farther away, they get larger, again, to show a three-dimensional effect. Right? And these artists, such as Raphael, used perspective. What we also have here is Italian Renaissance writers. It was a literature of how-to books that appeared to help ambitious men and women who wanted to make themselves known or rise in the Renaissance world. One of the first people here that we have is a man named Baldassare Castiglione, who is the author of the book of the Courtier, which describes the manners, skills, learning, and virtues of a member of the court who should have. He was basically looking at a person who was ideal, a person who was well-rounded in manners, skills, who was educated, who had certain virtues, and who would be competent to serve in the court of a king or any type of ruler. Here is a picture of Castiglione. And the second person, which we will look at, is Niccolo Machiavelli, who was the author of The Prince, again, a how-to book for rulers on how to gain and maintain power. So this is the last slide of my flipped classroom presentation to you on section 1 of chapter 1, the Renaissance in Italy. I encourage you to look over and listen again to what I have said, because in a couple of days we will be having an assessment on this information. If you have any questions, please see me. And you can also, again, look at this information or read over this information on pages 34 through 39 in your textbook. Thank you.